Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Capital G here with what is going to be a deep dive into Innistrad Midnight Vow, mostly the main set. Looking at it from an EDH perspective, looking at cards of all rarities, not just the big rares and mythics that most channels tend to favor. Going a little deeper, finding all sorts of little niche cards, utility cards. It's kind of my thing. But before we get into that, today of course being September 13th, 2021, and Golos Tireless Pilgrim has been banned. Now, I've done a deck on Golos, I've done the Gates deck. And, well, obviously I need to find a new commander for it. Considering that list was legal at the time I recorded and posted it, I'm going to keep that list up. But don't be surprised if you see another Mazes End deck down the line with a new commander at the helm. But for now, let us have a closer look at, before we forget, that's not the only change to the EDH banned and restricted list. Worldfire has been unbanned. We can now actually play this card in our format. I don't know who wants to play this card in our format, but we're allowed to now. Not wasting any more time, because I've got a lot of cards to look at. So the Geese Flame Reservoir, really cool artifact. They're pushing a lot of red-blue spell slinging in this particular set. And so this can take the spells that we sling and throw some counters on the Geese Flame Reservoir. We can spend those counters to deal damage to a target, or we can simply pay 2, tap, and exile the top card of our library. And we may play the card this turn. So, even if you're not playing Prosper, that is actually a great way of getting some extra card advantage in red. I really like this card. The Mask of Grizzle brand. Watch this one slot into Gavin decks everywhere. Equipped creature gets flying and lifelink. It's 3 to cast and 3 to equip, which seems like a lot. However, when the equipped creature dies, you get to pay. You have the opportunity to pay X life, where X is the creature's power, and if you do, you draw X cards. Soft Bear. Just a little 2 mana do nothing artifact until you need it to do something. When you do, you pay 2. It becomes a 4/4. And I'm personally eyeing this for my Massacre Girl deck because, well, this can crew vehicles, and I run a lot of vehicles in my Massacre Girl deck. The Celestis highlights some of the advantages of the new day and night mechanic. So, if you're not aware, once a day-bound permanent comes into play, or a card such as the Celestis that specifically says if it's neither day nor night, it becomes day when this enters the battlefield. So how that works, of course, is if the active player does not cast any spells on their turn, at the beginning of the next player's turn, it becomes night. If the active player plays 2 or more spells in a turn when it's night, it becomes day the following turn. So it's led to some improved werewolf designs, and it also leaves space open for things such as the Celestis to, potentially incidentally trigger if somebody doesn't have any spells they want to cast, or if you yourself are holding back plenty of instants. If you are running a deck and it's mostly instant speed, then a card like the Celestis is for you, because then you can dictate when it becomes day or night. It's a good mana rock, taps for any color for 3 mana. And 3 tap, and if it's night, it becomes day, otherwise it becomes night. So you can switch between night and day at sorcery speed. And whenever day becomes night or night becomes day, you gain a life, and then you may draw a card and discard a card. So, you're going to just get some incidental advantage off of this. I think it's a really good card. Moving on to Ludovic, Necrogenius, one of the new transforming cards. A 2/3 in Dimir colors, and when this enters the battlefield or attacks, you get to mill a card. And double black, double blue X. And you get to exile X creature cards from your graveyard to transform Ludovic into Olag, Ludovic's Hubris. When a creature transforms into Olag, it becomes a copy of a creature card exiled with it. It keeps the name Olag. It remains a 4/4 legendary, blue and black zombie in addition to its other colors and types. And you get to put a number of +1/+1 counters on Olag equal to the number of creature cards exiled with it. So if you exile 5 creature cards, for example, you copy your best one. It's going to be, and that creature is also still going to be a 4/4 with 5 +1/+1 counters on it. Interesting take for Dimir. I don't know if it's a great commander choice, for example, but I can definitely see some fun things happen with this. The Outland Liberator. This is fantastic. At uncommon, by the way. A green and a 1 for a 2/2 human werewolf, and you can pay 1 and sacrifice this to destroy an artifact or enchantment. Being a werewolf, it has the daybound, nightbound thing. So when it's daytime, we get Outland Liberator. When it's nighttime, we get Frenzied Trapbreaker, which we can still sacrifice to destroy an artifact or enchantment. But now, whenever this attacks, we can destroy an artifact or enchantment that the defending player controls. Absolutely fantastic. If you manage to swing with this on the nightbound side, you're just getting some free removal. Ardent Elementalist. 4 mana for this 2/1. That's when it enters the battlefield, return an instant or sorcery card from our graveyard to our hand. Red now has an Archaeomancer. I'm a huge fan. Auger of Autumn. Now this is a huge rare for us. Green and 1 for this 2/3 human druid. We can look at the top card of our library at any time. We may play lands from the top of our library. And as long as we control 3 or more creatures with different powers, the new Coven mechanic. And they quite literally mean if you have a 2-power creature, a 3-power creature, and say a 0-power creature. So 3 different powers. You may cast creature spells from the top of your library, so not just lands, but creatures. That is amazing. The card advantage that this is going to give you if it sticks around. Bereaved Survivor. I want this playmat. This is the art on this is absolutely gorgeous. First off, and 3 mana for this 2/1 says that whenever another creature we control dies, she transforms into Dauntless Avenger. Also a really cool piece of art, although I prefer the art on the front side. But nonetheless, whenever this attacks, you get to return a creature card with mana value 2 or less from our graveyard to the battlefield, tapped and attacking. And she's coming in at uncommon. I'd almost run her as a Pauper commander. Like, that's how good I think this card is. This is so sweet and so flavorful. Bloodthirsty Adversary. I love the Adversary cycle, by the way. So 2 mana for a 2/2 with haste, in this case a Vampire. And when it enters the battlefield, you may pay a red and 2 any number of times. People are like, why not bring back Multi-Kicker? The difference is you only have to pay this mana if the spell resolves and the Bloodthirsty Adversary hits the battlefield. You don't even have to cast the Bloodthirsty Adversary if it comes back through a Bereaved Survivor, for example. You can still activate this trigger or pay for this trigger as many times as you'd like. And when you pay this cost 1 or more times, this will get that many +1/+1 counters. So let's say you pay it twice. So 2 +1/+1 counters. And then exile that many instants or sorceries with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard and copy them. You may cast those copies without paying the mana cost. So there you go. Recur a lot of your instants and sorceries while getting a 4/4 or better, for example. I think is really sweet. Brimstone Vandal. 3 mana for this 2/3 Devil with Menace. If it's neither day nor night, it becomes day when this enters the battlefield. So much like the Celestis. Whenever day becomes night or night becomes day, deal 1 damage to each opponent. So let's say you do nothing on your turn and your opponent, casts their 2 spells and switches it back. Day would have become night, night would have become day, so that's already 2 damage to each opponent by doing absolutely nothing. Moving on to the Cathar Commando. A 3/1 for 2 mana with Flash. We can also pay mana and sacrifice this to destroy an artifact or enchantment. So basically it's super flexible targeted removal. We can pay 2 mana, block a 3 toughness creature and trade. Or we pay 2 mana to put this down, pay 1 more to knock out any artifact or enchantment at flash speed. Fantastic. Champion of the Parish. I shouldn't have to explain why this is good, but let's give it a quick read and you'll see what makes it so obviously powerful. 1 mana for a 1/1 zombie. And whenever another zombie enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on Champion of the Parish. Very straightforward. This gets big and turns sideways. Component Collector. 3 mana for this 1/4 Homunculus. Again, uses the day-night mechanic to tap or untap a non-land permanent. Pretty sweet. Looking at the legendary creature, Danik, Pious Apprentice. I don't think this is a particularly strong commander, but you never know who might be up for the challenge. A blue and a white for this 2/3 human soldier with lifelink. Cards in graveyards cannot be the target of spells or abilities. It also has the disturb mechanic, so if this is in your graveyard, you can cast it transformed by paying the disturb cost. So on the transform side, we have Danik Pious Apparition, a 3/2 flying. Whenever one or more creature cards are put into graveyards from anywhere, investigate. Only triggers once each turn. But it gives you a flyer, gives you some potential card advantage. And if this would be put into a graveyard from anywhere, exile it instead. So as your commander, it would still go to the command zone if you chose to. Yeah, not particularly strong, but I can definitely see this in the 99 of some decks. Diagraph Horde. Sneaky, cheeky little common here. 5 mana for a 3/4, which is not particularly impressive. But it does enter the battlefield with 2 zombies with Decayed. We now have decaying zombies that cannot block, and if they ever attack, they're sacrificed at end of combat. He's going to come into play with 2 such zombies, but when you do, you also get to exile up to 2 target cards from graveyards. Graveyard strategies are already rampant in our format, and Innistrad simply encourages more of the same. So we're actually getting a lot of good graveyard hate in this set. Don't be afraid to use it. Dreadhound, 6 mana for a 6/6 Demon Dog. And whenever a creature dies or is put into a graveyard from a library, each opponent loses 1 life. So 6 mana, 6/6 seems a little much for the Aristocrats effect. And by the way, it also mills 3 cards when it enters the battlefield. But something that's a little more expensive to get rid of, or a little harder to get rid of than the rest. It's a lot harder to put out, but it's harder to get rid of. So I thought it was worth a mention for those that want it. Moving on to the Enduring Angel. 3/3 with double strike, flying, and you have hexproof. And if your life total would be reduced to 0 or less, we would instead transform the Enduring Angel, and our life total becomes 3. Then if Enduring Angel did not transform this way, you lose the game. When she transforms, it becomes Angelic Enforcer. Flyer, you have hexproof. Power and toughness are each equal to your life total, which by the time you flip this would be a 3/3. And whenever this attacks, double your life total. So if this somehow flips over and becomes uninterrupted, it gets huge. I don't specifically recommend it. I like it for the flying double strike. Like, just the front side on its own is pretty good. You're not going to proactively try to flip this. But a 3/3 flying double strike, throw some equipment on there. Good stuff. Falcon Wrath Perforator, sorry. 2 mana for this 2/1, and when this attacks, it deals 1 damage to defending player. So some of the new vampires that we've seen in the set so far care about whether or not your opponents have lost life. So this is a way to make sure that your opponents lose life, even if they block. Moving on to the Falcon Wrath Pitfighter, an example of one of these payoffs. 1 mana for this 2/1 Vampire Warrior. And it says, pay 1 and a red and discard a card, and sacrifice a vampire, draw 2 cards. Activate only if an opponent lost life this turn. If there's any weakness I find in my Edgar Markov deck, it's card advantage. So having something that's aggressive and repeatable, such as the Falcon Wrath Pitfighter, seems pretty sweet. Fangblade Brigand. 4 mana for this 3/4. You pay 2 mana, a red and a 1. It gets +1/0 and gains first strike until end of turn. And it's daybound. So obviously whenever it's nighttime, it will instead be a Fangblade Eviscerator, which maintains that 2 mana to give it 1/0 first strike. Or you can pay 5 mana, that's 4 and a red, to have your whole team get +2/+0 until end of turn. Now the reason I have this here, it seems very underwhelming, but if you are proactively trying to make it night, because your opponents are casting spells, keep making it daytime. If you're proactively trying to make it night, you don't want to be casting spells. But what are you going to do with your mana? A card like the Fangblade Brigand gives you a place to dump your mana. So that's kind of why I highlighted it here. Firmament Sage. If it's either day or night, it becomes day when this enters the battlefield, and whenever day becomes night or night becomes day, draw a card. Yes, please. Just yes, please. That's all I have to say. Just yes, please. I'll take card draw by doing absolutely nothing. Flame Channeler. 2 mana for this 2/2, and whenever your spell you control deals damage, transform it into the embodiment of flame. And from here on out, whenever a spell you control deals damage, it gets a flame counter. You can also pay 1 and remove a flame counter to exile the top card of your library, and you may play that card this turn. Again, this huge spell slinging theme. Burn is going to be a thing for sure. Not that it never goes away, really. Flesh Taker, just some of the creepiest artwork. This is legit scary stuff. Black and white for this 2/2 human assassin, and whenever you sacrifice another creature, you gain a life and scry 1. It also gives you a sack outright. Pay 1, sack another creature, it gets +2/+2. Florian, Voldarian Scion. 3 mana for this Vampire Noble in Rakdos colors with first strike. And at the beginning of your post-combat main phase, you look at the top X cards of your library, where X is the total amount of life your opponents lost this turn. Exile one of those cards and put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. You may play the exiled card this turn. So you can... The thing with Impulse Draw is the fact that you exile your top card, and it's probably going away whether you cast it or not. At least here, so long as... your opponents have lost basically more than 1 life total. You're able to basically look at your top X and pick the one that you want to exile, and then you can choose one or not to cast it. That is pretty nice. Gavin Dawnguard. 3 mana for this 3/3 human soldier with Ward 1. Uses the day-night mechanic. Whenever day becomes night or night becomes day, look at the top 4 cards of your library, and you may reveal a creature card with mana value 3 or less from among them, put it in your hand. So, again, by doing absolutely nothing, maybe get some card draw. Gisa, Glorious Resurrector. 4 mana, 4/4 human wizard. Good to see her again. If a creature an opponent controls would die, exile it instead. And at the beginning of your upkeep, put all creature cards exiled with Gisa, Glorious Resurrector onto the battlefield under your control. They gain Decayed. Yeah, it's another take your opponent's stuff commander. Note that it's 2 separate triggers, so that means if Gisa's out, your opponent's creatures die, but then Gisa is removed before it comes back to your upkeep. then the creatures that she had exiled will permanently stay exiled. So just thought I would note that. The worst case scenario is your opponent's creatures get exiled. The best case scenario is you get your opponent's creatures and get to swing at least once. Hound Tamer. 3/3 trample for 3. You can pay 4 mana to put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. And it's got the Daybound, Nightbound mechanic. Nighttime, it is an untamed pup. And like I had said before, it gives you a place to dump your mana if you don't want to cast spells and basically force it into nighttime. Moving on. Intrepid Adversary. Probably the weakest of the adversary cycle because of course it would be its white. 2 mana for this 3/1 with lifelink. When it enters the battlefield, you may pay a white and 1 any number of times, and when you pay this cost 1 or more times, it gets that many Valor counters. Creatures you control get +1/+1 for each Valor counter on Intrepid Adversary. Might actually be good in my Atraxo deck, come to think of it. Jadar, Ghoulcaller of Nephilah. 2 mana for this 1/1 human wizard. At the beginning of your end step, if you do not control a creature with Decayed, get a 2/2 black zombie creature with Decayed. Not a lot of value, but it's not really a high cost either. Don't expect to see this one in the command zone. I don't think we'll see very much of it, honestly. Good. It's just having a zombie that you can swing. Always having a zombie that you can swing with, but unless you're using that zombie to sacrifice, there's definitely better choices. Lamphold Harrier. 2 mana for this 2/2 wolf. 4 mana. Target creature cannot block this turn. Yet again, another mana dump for the werewolf decks. Lierd, Disciple of the Drowned. 5 mana for this 3/4 human wizard. And how about this? In a blue deck, spells can't be countered. And each instant and sorcery card in your graveyard has flashback. The flashback cost is equal to the mana cost. That is insane. Mono blue spell slinging, but no counters. You cannot use counters. Not just the Lear's opponents, but the Lear player himself or themselves may not be able to use counter magic while the commander is on the battlefield. So interesting. Obviously, there's other ways to respond to spells and whatever else is happening, but Liesa, Forgotten Archangel. Black, double white and 2 for this 4/5 flying lifelink. And whenever another non-token creature you control dies, return that card to its owner's hand at the beginning of the next end step. And if a creature an opponent controls would die, exile it instead. So, keep your opponents from recurring creatures for value, which is a very, very powerful effect, obviously. Some people are looking at this as the next Shadowborn Disciple commander. Shadowborn Apostle, the tricky thing about that is the fact that it's double white to cast a commander. Obviously Urborg exists to fix that problem, but nonetheless, still, it's got to be a good card. You got to get good value if you go. It doesn't matter if you do the Shadowborn Apostle route or not. The value is there. Lord of the Forsaken, talk about value. 6 mana for the 6/6 flying trample demon. Pay a black, sack another creature, target player mills 3 cards. Not super powerful on its own. Pay a life, add a colorless mana to your mana pool. You can only use to cast spells from your graveyard. Between Flashback, Disturb, and several commanders that let you just straight up cast spells from your graveyard. Run this in Muldrotha, you're paying life to cast spells. We've seen how powerful that is with Krick. So, obviously Lord of the Forsaken is a shoo-in for any and every Muldrotha deck in the world. Lind, Cheerful Tormentor. This one is an exclusive commander card, but it's not going to be in any of the commander precons. You can only actually pull this in collector's boosters and set boosters, as each of those will have a commander card slot, and she might be in there. So what does she bring us? Grixis and 1 generic for a 2/4 with Death Touch. And whenever a curse is put into your graveyard from the battlefield, return it to the battlefield attached to you at the beginning of the next end step. Okay. And at the beginning of your upkeep, you may attach a curse that's attached to you to one of your opponents. If you do, draw 2 cards. So, she is the, for reals this time, Curse Commander. I don't see myself playing it, but I can definitely see a lot of people having fun with this one. Also note that she has Death Touch, so throw on a Viridian Longbow or any sort of aura that lets her tap to deal damage to a target and watch creatures fall. Just saying. Malevolent Hermit. This is really good stuff for blue. Blue and 1 for a 2/1. Human Wizard. You can pay a blue and sacrifice it to counter a non-creature spell unless its controller pays 3. So, you basically got a 1 mana leak on your board at all times. But if this is in your graveyard and you cast it for the disturb cost, you get Benevolent Geese instead. A 2/2 flyer, non-creature spells you control cannot be countered. And then if this would be put into a graveyard from anywhere, exile instead. Still, that's so good. Non-creature spells you control can't be countered. If he's out, you can protect him. Well, pretty much everything that you want to cast is going to be getting through. Moonveil Regent, 4/4 dragon with flying. Whenever you cast a spell, you may discard your hand. If you do, draw a card for each of that spell's colors. So obviously we just had Tiamat in Forgotten Realms, so have this outcaster Tiamat, pitch your hand, draw 5. That's a thing that you can do, and that's in addition to tutoring for dragons with Tiamat. And whenever this dies, it deals X damage to any target where X is the number of colors amongst permanents you control. So this can die and straight up deal anywhere from 1 to 5 damage to a target. Morbid Opportunist, 3 mana for this 1/3, and whenever one or more other creatures die, draw a card. This ability only triggers once each turn, but no drawback. The drawback is that you can only get 1 per turn, 1 card per turn. But yeah, as long as things are dying every turn, and it's very likely that it will in this format, you're going to get a lot of card draw for this. Old Stick Fingers. Not so sure I like this one a whole lot, but here we go. A green, a black, and X for this horror. Legendary Horror. Whenever you cast the spell, reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal X creature cards. Put all creature cards revealed this way into your graveyard. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Old Stick Fingers' power and toughness are each equal to the number of creature cards in your graveyard. So, it's a good way to dump a bunch of creatures into your graveyard if that's what you want to do. If you're running a bunch of recursion, excellent. Obviously, when you do this, you're going to leave your graveyard vulnerable, so be prepared to be Bajuka bogged. Honestly, I'm not feeling this card per se, but I can definitely see what opportunities it opens if you somehow make it back to your turn after you cast it. Patrician's Geese, 3 mana for this 2/2 flying. Other spirits you control get +1/+1. We're going to be seeing a lot more spirits, especially in the next set, as we understand it. And spells you cast from your graveyard cost 1 less to cast. So mana reduction, always a good thing. Poppet Stitcher, 3 mana for this 2/3 human wizard. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you get a zombie creature token with Decayed. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 3 or more creature tokens, it transforms into Poppet Factory. So it completely changes types when it transforms. It's no longer a creature, it's just an artifact. Creature tokens you control lose all abilities that have base power and toughness 3/3. That includes Decayed. Decayed is an ability. So all of a sudden your 2/2 Decayed zombies, let's say you've got 3 of those, are now 3/3s that you can freely attack with, and they'll come home as long as they're not trading in combat. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may transform Poppet Factory, so you can turn it back to a creature on a future turn if you so chose to. And note that because the card transforms, it has not left play. It would be it would not be sick when it comes back in. Primal Adversary. 3 mana for this 4/3 wolf with trample. And when this enters the battlefield, you can pay green and 1 any number of times. When you do, it gets that many +1/+1 counters. And up to that many target lands you control become 3/3 wolves with haste that are still lands. So all of a sudden, army in a can. Reckless Stormseeker. At the beginning of combat on your turn, target creature you control gets +1/0 and gains haste until end of turn. Already good on the human werewolf side. When it's nighttime, it's a storm charged slasher. At the beginning of combat on your turn, target creature you control gets +2/+0 and gains trample and haste until end of turn. So even better if it's nighttime. But even the daytime side is good enough, I think. Anytime you have a haste enabler that, you know, also gives you a little buff, why not? Rem Carl. Let's try that again. I haven't had a chance to practice this name. Rem Carolus. There you go. Stalwart Slayer. 3 mana for this 2/3 with flying and haste, a human knight. If a spell would deal damage to you or another permanent you control, prevent that damage. So that means as long as this is out, a blasphemous act will not damage your creatures. And if a spell would deal damage to an opponent or a permanent an opponent controls, deals that much damage +1 instead. So you can, you know, bolt a 4 toughness creature with this and really trade up. So there's some cool stuff here. I think it's just going to slot into a Boros deck rather than lead one. That being said, if you're playing a lot of damage-based sweepers, this could slot in very nicely and really protect your team. Sarif the Viper's Fang, 4 mana for this 3/4 human warlock. Doesn't look like a human, but then again, that snake is deceptive. Other tapped creatures you control have Death Touch. Other untapped creatures you control have Hexproof. And 1 in a tap, and untap another creature or land you control. So yeah, lots of flexibility there. Pairs very nicely with, there was the name eludes me at this second during recording. Is it Finn the Fangbearer? That's who I'm thinking. The one that gives all your Death Touch creatures poisonous, basically. You poison out your opponent. You poison out your opponent with a bunch of Death Touchers. Sarif says everything's a Death Toucher. Basically, as long as it's turned sideways, it's a Death Toucher. Sigarda, Champion of Light, double white, green, and 1 for 4/4 flying and trample angel. Humans you control get +1/+1. And whenever this attacks, if you control 3 or more creatures with different powers, you get to look at the top 5 cards of your library, reveal a human card from among them, and put it in your hand. So, Sigarda Human Tribal, because Sigarda Human Tribal, nothing new. Different approach to it, but nothing new. Slaughter Specialist, I like this one. 2 mana for a 3/3 Vampire Warrior, and when this enters the battlefield, each opponent gets a 1/1 white human creature token. Whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, put a +1/+1 counter on Slaughter Specialist. Massacre Girl would like to meet you and have you in her deck. Just saying. Slogurk the Overslime. 3 mana in Simic for this 3/3 Ooze. Has trample, and whenever a land is put into your graveyard from anywhere, it gets a +1/+1 counter. Remove 3 +1/+1 counters to return Slogurk to its owner's hand, so you can protect it from board wipes or targeted removal if it starts getting carried away with its +1 counters. And whenever this leaves the battlefield, return up to 3 target land cards from your graveyard to your hand. So yeah, you're gonna run a few extra fetches with this. This is definitely a Voltron landfall deck, if that makes any sense. That's what we're doing. Landfall Voltron with +1/+1 counters is what we're doing here. Sludge Monster. When this enters the battlefield or attacks, put a slime counter on another creature, target creature. Non-horror creatures with slime counters on them lose all abilities and have base power and toughness 2/2. So, this can actually turn off an opponent's commander, just turn it into a 2/2 with no abilities. Keep in mind that if you do this to an opponent's commander and they still swing out at you and deal damage to you, it's still commander damage. Nonetheless, if Prosper is not drawing cards or making treasures, what is Prosper good for? Spectral Adversary. 2 mana for this 2/1 with flash and flying. And when this enters the battlefield, you can pay a blue and 1 any number of times. It gets that many +1/+1 counters. And then up to that many artifacts, creatures, or enchantments phase out. So this is almost like a blue Tafari's Protection, but more expensive and more limited in scope. Still, like if an opponent attacks you with a bunch of creatures, for example, phase them out. And then everyone else can crack back and potentially knock them out. So, really cool card, very flexible card. Moving on. Sunrise Cavalier, 3 mana for this 3/3 of trample and haste. Uses the day and night mechanic. And whenever day becomes night or night becomes day, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. I like it for the trample and the haste. Will slot into most Boros equipment decks as is. And the fact that it incidentally adds +1/+1 counters to the table makes it a cool card to me. Suspicious Stowaway is going to have a home in Tanazir. 2 mana for this 1/1 that cannot be blocked. When this deals combat damage to a player, draw a card and discard a card. And that's if it's daybound. At night, it's a green werewolf. Seafaring Werewolf. Which still can't be blocked. Its base power and toughness is 2/1. And whenever this deals combat damage to a player, just straight up draw a card. So even better. Moving on to the Tainted Adversary. 2 mana for this 2/3 zombie with Death Touch. When this enters the battlefield, we can pay a black and 2 any number of times. It gets that many +1/+1 counters, and we get twice that many 2/2 zombie creature tokens with Decayed. So 2 mana for the zombie that we get to keep, and then 3 mana for 2 zombies that we get to use at least once. Tovalar, Dire Overlord, the werewolf commander we have been asking for the better part of a decade. Green, red, and 1 for this 3/3 human werewolf. And whenever a wolf or werewolf we control deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. Already awesome right there. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 3 or more wolves and or werewolves, it becomes night. Then transform any number of human werewolves you control. Of course, Tovalar, being a human werewolf himself, will transform until Tovalar, the Night Scourge. Whenever a wolf or werewolf you control deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. Maintains that ability. A green, a red, and X. Target wolf or werewolf you control gets +XO and trample until end of turn. Sweet. I myself don't really plan on building the werewolf deck. But having a werewolf commander that, really pays it off, and also gives you a mana dump for when you don't want to be casting spells anymore, that is exactly what we're looking for. Trisket Decaphile. Innistrad and the number 13 go hand in hand. Blue and 1 for this 1/3. I see what you did there. And you have no maximum hand size. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you have exactly 13 cards in your hand, you win the game. And it also has a activated ability of 4 mana to draw a card. So, it's kind of tricky to pull off exactly 13 cards. But, you're also playing blue, so as long as people aren't interacting with you and trying to mess up your plan, you should be able to get there. It is very much possible. Vadric Astral Archmage. Red, blue, and 1 for this 1/2 human wizard, and if it's neither day nor night, it becomes day. So, the day-night mechanic, of course, is in effect. Instant and sorcery spells cost X less to cast, where X is Vedric's power. So off the hop, reduced by 1. And whenever day becomes night or night becomes day, he gets +1/+1 counter. So the more counters he gets, the less expensive your spells get. I don't expect him to ever replace Mizzix, for example. Although the biggest difference is that Vedric could probably actually stand up in combat and might even get a Voltron knockout, whereas Mizzix never will. Vampire Socialite, red and a black for his 2/2 Vampire Noble with Menace. And when this enters the battlefield, if an opponent lost life this turn, put a 1/1 counter on each other vampire you control. And as long as an opponent lost life this turn, each other vampire you control enters the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter. So not only are we going wide with vampires, but we're starting to make them a little bigger. Voldaren Ambusher. When this enters the battlefield, if an opponent lost life this turn, it deals X damage to up to 1 target creature or a planeswalker, where X is the number of vampires you control. For 3 mana to get a 2/2, doesn't look like a whole lot, but don't forget Edgar Markov. Not only is he one of the most popular commanders in our format, but we'll be seeing him again very soon in Crimson Vow. It's looking like all indications that the wedding itself will be between Olivia Voldaren and Edgar Markov. That is a very frightening prospect. Last creature we're going to be looking at today is Willow Geese. 1 green for this 1/1 Trample Treefolk Spirit. And whenever one or more cards leave your graveyard, put a 1/1 counter on the Willow Geese. So, a creature that can get really big, really fast in Worldfire and turn sideways. Yes, please. And whenever this dies, you gain life equal to its power. Why wouldn't we play this? This is actually a really sweet card. A few enchantments to look at. Ghoulish Procession. Black and 1 for this enchantment. Whenever 1 or more non-token creatures die, you get a 2/2 zombie token with Decayed once each turn. So that is still up to 4 zombies a turn if things are pretty chaotic on the board. Curse of Shaken Faith. Got a Storm player at the table? Throw this on them. Whenever an enchanted player casts a spell other than the first spell that they cast, or whenever they copy a spell, this will deal 2 damage to them. So, cast or copy spells beyond the first, they take 2. Curse of Silence. When this enters the battlefield, choose a card name. Spells with the chosen name, enchanted player cast costs 2 more to cast. And whenever the enchanted player casts the spell with the chosen name, you may sacrifice the Curse of Silence to draw a card. Really hoses the Shadowborn Apostle strategy, because now each one costs 3 mana. Or you just name an opponent's commander, and when they finally do cast it, you can just sack this off and draw a card. It's also cheap if you're running Gen as your commander. So, lots of things you can do with this one. Necrosynthesis. 2 mana for this aura that enchants a creature. Whenever another creature dies, put a 1/1 counter on this creature. Yes, please. When an enchanted creature dies, look at the top X cards of your library, where X is its power. Put one of those cards in your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So, your creature's an 8/8, it dies. Look at your top 8 cards, choose the best one. Ominous Roost. When this enters the battlefield, or whenever you cast a spell from your graveyard, you get a bird. The bird is 1/1 with flying, and it can only block other creatures with flying. That's fine. If I'm playing Wildrow, if I'm casting 2, 3, 4 spells a turn from my graveyard, I've got a whole flock of birds to attack with, not to block with. The Meat Hook Massacre. Watch this one win some games. Black, and X. When this enters the battlefield, each creature gets -X until end of turn. Whenever a creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life. And whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, you gain a life. So, obviously you want your creatures to die, but the life loss affects all of your opponents, not just one. And the fact that this can act not just as a board wipe, but as a win con, or at least a damage dealer. Yeah, this card is absolutely insane. I think it's my personal favorite from the set. Unnatural Growth, quad green, 4 green, and a generic for this enchantment. At the beginning of each combat, double the power and toughness of each creature you control until end of turn. Yipes. Just yipes. Just yipes. Moving on to some instants with Blood Pact. Target player draws 2 cards and loses 2 life. You can use it for yourself, you can help a friend. Heck, if somebody's down to 2 life or less, you can knock them out. I've seen it happen. Cathartic Pyre, 2 mana for this instant. Choose one of the following. You can choose to do 3 damage to a creature or player, or you may discard 2 cards, then draw that many cards. Great flexibility here. Corpse Cobble. So if somebody tries to hit you some targeted removal, respond with this black and blue instant. Sacrifice any number of creatures, you get an XX blue and black zombie token with Menace, where X is the total power of the sacrificed creatures. And it has flashback. So this is great for getting around targeted removal. If someone board wipes, keep this in your hand. But if it's just targeted removal, respond with this and, well, enjoy maintaining the advantage. It's basically a counter spell. Electric Revelation. 3 mana for this instant as an additional cost. Discard a card, draw 2. Red's got tons of these. This is the only one with flashback. Faithful Mending, blue and white. You gain 2 life, draw 2 cards, then discard 2 cards, and it has flashback. So, also pretty sweet. Nice play on Faithless Looting. Fateful Absence. White and 1 for this instant. Destroy target creature or planeswalker its controller investigates. That is a very powerful, very efficient removal spell. Yes, your opponents will eventually draw a card if they take the time to spend that 2 mana. But that's fine. It still takes their best creature, their best planeswalker off the table at instant speed. That is amazing. Galvanic Iteration, red and blue instant. When you cast your next instant or sorcery spell this turn, copy it. You may choose new targets for the copy. And it has flashback. Geestwave, 2 mana for this instant. Return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. If you control that permanent, draw a card. So any permanent that needs to get off the table gets off the table, and if it just happens to be yours, you're dodging a removal spell, what have you, gain the extra card advantage. Infernal Grasp, speaking of efficient targeted removal, destroy target creature. You lose 2 life for a black and a 1. I'll take that deal every time. That is one of the most powerful and efficient removal spells black has seen. Just straight up destroying creatures. Lunar Frenzy. Red and X. Target creature you control gets +X/+0 and gains first strike and trample until end of turn. You can even just pay red and put X = 0. And you just gave your creature first strike and trample until end of turn. So, yeah, nice card. If you happen to dump, 8, 9, 10 into X, even better. Memory Dolch. 4 mana for this instant. Look at the top X cards of your library, where X is the amount of mana spent to cast the spell. Put 2 in your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Really nice at instant speed. And also has flashback for 7, which means if you flash it back, you look at your top 7 and keep your best 2. Revenge of the Drowned. The wording on this is interesting. 4 mana for this instant. Target creature's owner puts it on the top or bottom of their library. You create a 2/2 black zombie creature token with Decayed. So, not only do you get a body that you can attack with, or whatever other shenanigans you may be up to, but whatever creature you target, its owner has to decide if it's going onto the top or bottom of the library. If it's going to the bottom of the library, it's unlikely we're going to see it again this game. If it goes to the top, your opponent has basically sacrificed their next card draw to get it back. Rite of Harmony. Wow. White and green for this instant. Whenever a creature or enchantment enters the battlefield under your control this turn, draw a card. It doesn't say non-token, for example, so if you have the chance to spam a bunch of tokens, cast this first, spam your tokens, draw a bunch of cards. And it has flashback. Yes, please. Excellent card draw for Selesnya. Secrets of the Key. 1 mana for this instant that says Investigate. If the spell was cast from a graveyard, investigate twice instead. I just like the art. I just like the art on this one. Is it a great card? Well, I don't think it's the best card draw spell, but it's definitely great if you want those tokens. Brutaclad would love to have some cheap clue tokens on the battlefield that he can turn into, you know, mere battle spheres or what have you, whatever it wants to transform its artifact tokens into. So I think this is pretty cool if you have artifact synergies. Startle. Target creature gets -2/0 until end of turn. You get a zombie equivalent with Decade, and you draw a card. So, Massive Combat, get a zombie, draw a card. I like it. Jalira wants this card because, hey, that's another token creature I can generate just by casting a spell instead of having a dorky 2-drop get in the way of all my big creatures. So, that's what I'm doing with it. Thraben Exorcism. Kai is on Innistrad for whatever reason. White and 1 for this instant. Exile target spirit, creature with Disturb, or enchantment. Enchantments have definitely gained popularity over the past 3-4 years, especially, you know, I don't have to name all the enchantments that are out there. We see them all the time. We want to get rid of them. This can exile the Theros gods. So this can answer the Theros gods. We're going to be seeing more spirits, especially in the next set. There's a bunch of changelings. Changelings are spirits. Exile a creature with Disturb. Not super relevant. They just kind of toss that in there, but still. This is great exile removal. Very specific targets, but very valid and relevant targets. Turn the Earth. 1 green instant. Choose up to 3 target cards in graveyards. The owners of those cards shuffle them into their libraries. You gain 2 life. And it has flashback, so again, our opponents are going to be playing graveyard strategies. We're going to be seeing a lot of them. So let's mess up the day a little bit, shall we? Lands. I've got Deserted Beach standing in for the full cycle of what do we call slow lands. This enters the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 or more other lands, and they are all in allied colors in this set. So we have 5 of them here. I'm assuming the other 5 will be in Crimson Vow. These are definitely good lands because they have that potential of coming in untapped in the later stages of the game. So, I like them. And Hostile. They had some fun with the name on that one, didn't they? Taps for generic, or 1 and tap and sack a creature. This gets a soul counter. Then once there are 3 or more soul counters on it, remove the counters, transform it into a Creeping In, and untap it. Whenever Creeping In attacks, you may exile a creature card from your graveyard. If you do, each opponent loses X life and you gain X life, where X is the number of creature cards exiled with Creeping In. That includes the creatures it exiled when it was on its front side, by the way. Another cool feature, this can phase out. So if somebody tries to remove it, you can just phase it out, and that way whatever creatures that were exiled with it, that still holds true because the card will never leave play. Looking at our Planeswalkers, we have Arlen the Pack's Hope. Much like previous Arlens, she's got the flip mechanic going on, Daybound and Nightbound this time out. Green, red, and 2 for loyalty. Daybound side. Until your next turn, for +1. Until your next turn, you may cast creature spells as though they had flash, and each creature you control enters the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on it. Again, this is really, really sweet. That means that she's out. You can simply +1 if you want to cast more creatures. Simply +1 and wait. And then let the night fall. -3, create 2/2 green wolf creature token so she can protect herself. By getting a couple of wolves out there. On the flip side, Arlen the Moon's Fury. +2 to add a green and red to your mana pool. So it can ramp you up if you are on the night side when you get to activate her. And for 0, until end of turn, she becomes a 5/5 with Trample, Indestructible, and Haste. Note that as it stands, she could still be damaged. I think she would still lose loyalty in combat if she's damaged, so watch your timing on that one. Moving on to Tafari, who slows the sunset. I like the name, and that's probably one of the better Tafari arts too. A blue and white and 2 for this 4 loyalty to Planeswalker. +1, choose up to 1 target artifact, up to 1 target creature, and up to 1 target land. Untap those permanents you control, tap the ones you don't control, and you gain 2 life. So automatically I want it in my Amanatu deck because this can untap. What's it called? It can provide a lot of value for that deck. -2, look at the top 3 cards of your library. Put 1 in your hand and the rest on the bottom in any order. So choose the best of your next 3 cards. -7, you get an emblem with untap all permanents you control during each opponent's untap step, and you draw a card during each opponent's draw step. Nasty if you manage to if you run this with green and you get your doubling season, basically for 4 mana you have a permanent Seedborn use that draws you cards. Insane. Renin 7, double green and 3, 5 loyalty and 4 abilities. +1, reveal the top 4 cards of your library. Put all lands revealed this way into your hand and the rest into your graveyard. For 0, put any number of land cards from your hand onto the battlefield tapped. -3, create a green treefold creature token with reach and power and toughness equal to the number of lands you control. So protects itself, gives you some ramp, gives you some card advantage, puts non-land cards in your graveyard. So if you're working around that strategy, that's good stuff too. And -8, return all permanent cards from your graveyard to your hand. You get an emblem with, you have no maximum hand size. The payoff is there if you manage to get to 8. On to sorceries with Rite of Oblivion, great removal spell in Orzhov colors. White-black sorcery speed. As an additional cost to cast a spell, sacrifice a non-land permanent. Exile a non-land permanent. So this hits pretty much anything, and it has flashback. When you pay the flashback, yes, you have to sacrifice a non-land permanent. I'm pretty sure. Actually, it says it right there. From your graveyard for its flashback cost and any additional cost, then exile it. So yes, you would still have to sacrifice an online permanent to use it the second time, but it's Orzhov. That's fine. Angel Fire Ignition. White, red, and 1. Put 2 +1/+1 counters on target creature. It gains Vigilance, Trample, Lifelink, Indestructible, and Haste until end of turn. And it also has flashback, so you can give this to a second creature on the same turn, or you can spread it out over 2 turns. Whatever you like. Playing the keyword soup strategy. Burn down the house. Double red and 3. And you can choose one of the following modes on this sorcery. Deal 5 damage to each creature and each planeswalker. So Hour of Devastation, but without keeping Bolas safe. Or create 3 1/1 red devil creature tokens with, when it dies, deal 1 damage to any target, and they gain haste until end of turn. You're not playing this for the second mode, you're playing it for the first one. 5 damage to each creature and each planeswalker. Really efficient. Hour of Devastation, proven powerful board wipe in our format. Burn down the house, same deal. Can't Stay Away, I love the art. This is hilarious stuff. Black and white for the sorcery. Return target creature card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. It gains if this creature would die, exile it instead. So give one of your creatures a second chance for a very efficient cost. It has a flashback of 5 as well if you want to do this a second time. Croaking Counterpart. This is funny. Blue, green, 1 sorcery. Create a token that's a copy of target non-frog creature. Except it's a 1/1 frog. So somebody's got their Prosper out. Copy it. It's a 1/1 frog, but it's still a Prosper. And you can flash it back for 5 mana too. Dire Strain Rampage. This is interesting. Green, red, and 1 for the sorcery. Destroy target artifact, enchantment, or land. If a land was destroyed this way, its controller may search the library for up to 2 basics, put them onto the battlefield tapped, and shuffle. Otherwise, its controller may search their library for a basic land, put onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. So, very interesting. You can actually destroy your own land and use it as a hero effect. Or if your opponent has a land, or if your opponent has a land that's gotta go, it's gotta go. You can also destroy artifacts or enchantments with it, and yes, whoever controls that artifact or enchantment will have the opportunity to go get a basic. But like I said, they could do some very interesting stuff with this card, I think. Eaten Alive is an additional cost to cast a spell. Sack a creature, or pay a black and 3 more. Exile target creature or planeswalker. Hyper efficient. 1 black exile, so long as you have something to sacrifice. And we have a bunch of zombies with Decayed in this set, just saying. Hallowed Respite. Blue, white for this sorcery. Exile target non-legendary creature, then return it to the battlefield under its owner's control. If it entered under your control, it gets a 1/1 counter. Otherwise, tap it. So you can basically tap down an opponent's creature. You can use it for political favor by getting another ETB trigger on something. Or you can flash your own thing. Make it a little bigger. And of course, get your own ETB trigger. Also has flashback. Path to the Festival. Search your library for a basic. Put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. Then if there are 3 or more basic land types amongst lands you control, scry 1. Pretty sweet. You can flashback for 5, so you can go get a couple lands with this. Unnatural Moonrise. For red and green, this sorcery makes it night. It becomes night. And until end of turn, target creature gets +1/0 and gains trample, and whenever this deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. You can also flash it back. Vanquish the Horde. White gets its own Blasphemous Act. White, and 6 for the sorcery that costs 1 less to cast for each creature on the battlefield. Destroy all creatures. Fantastic. Probably White's most efficient creature board wipe. Because oftentimes you'll be casting this for just white, and you're done. And also Audric in full badass mode here. Not that he's happy about being a badass. If you read the flavor text, he's not happy about being a badass. But he's a badass. Wake to Slaughter. Red, black, 3 for the sorcery. Choose up to 2 target creature cards in your graveyard. An opponent chooses 1 to go to your hand. The other comes onto the battlefield under your control with haste. It gets exiled at the beginning of the next end step. And it has flashback, so fun little Rakdos Reanimator card. And the last spell we're going to be looking at today, Witherthorn Blessing. Blue and a green for this sorcery. Whenever a +1/+1 count, put a +1/+1 counter on up to 1 target creature you control. Tap up to 1 target creature you don't control, and that creature doesn't untap during its control's next untap step. So, make one of your creatures bigger, freeze lock an opponent's blocker. I call it freeze lock. I have lots of names for it, but really tap down an opponent's creature and they can't block for 2 turns. And it flashes back. Tanazir says yes please. Just saying. Or any Simic deck would say yes please to this. And on that, we're going to call it a day. For anyone who's stuck around this long, how long did this go, actually? Oops. But then again, no surprise. Like I said, we went in-depth, so with that in mind, if anyone who's stuck around this long, thanks for watching. Hope you found some cool ideas and some cool concepts for your next build. And still working on my next deck tech. Just life's kind of gotten away from me for a little bit, but hey, finally get to go on my honeymoon. We've been waiting a year for this, so finally get to go. So with that in mind, I'm gonna stop the recording. I'm gonna disappear for a few days, and next time you see me, I'm hopefully gonna have a deck tech for you. Bye for now.